Welcome to our exciting journey exploring the topic of settler colonialism and its ongoing impacts on Indigenous communities. Today we will be exploring the article We Live on Stolen Land and its connections to real-world issues supported by evidence from a variety of academic sources. So to start off, this article, We Live on Stolen Land, delves into the history of Canada, focusing on the concept of settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is like when new neighbors move into the neighborhood and decide they want to live in all the houses. So they ask the old neighbors to leave and take over everything. It's about one group of people coming in and taking over from another group. As mentioned in the article, European settlers remove Indigenous peoples from their lands and establish colonies, leading to the loss of Indigenous culture, identity, and rights, which is shown here in this image. This is a colony back then. The article also talks about how Indigenous communities were treated unfairly through agreements, like contracts, that were not fair and how they face unfairness in how things were run. This happened because some people believed that they were better than others, which isn't fair or true. Authored by Zainab Khalil, the article aims to raise awareness about the ongoing impact of colonialism and promotes dialogue about Indigenous history and reconciliation efforts in Canada. Now that we've learned about what the article is all about, it's time to deconstruct the main article using Kellner and Scher's 6 critical questions, which will be shown in big letters above the picture. This is to get a better understanding of the background of the article and to gain knowledge on it. So the first question is, who are all the possible people who made choices and helped create this text? Well, this article was written by Zainab Khalil, who is a feminist writer and teacher. It also most likely involves Indigenous activists, scholars, and allies committed to addressing the historical and contemporary impacts of settler colonialism. Next, we have how was the text constructed and delivered/assessed? Well, this article was constructed through written language and assessed digitally as an educational resource. This way, anyone can access this online. Next is, how could this text be understood differently? Well, different audiences may interpret the article based on their cultural backgrounds and perspectives on colonialism. So next is, what values, points of view, and ideologies are represented or missing? Well, the article represents Indigenous communities as victims of colonial oppression, but may overlook settler perspectives of specific Indigenous voices. This article doesn't include all information needed, but shares a perspective from this specific author. Why was the text created and shared? Well, this article was created in a way to raise awareness about settler colonialism impact and advocate for social change. Whom does this text advantage or disadvantage? Well, the article advantages Indigenous communities by amplifying their voices, but may disadvantage settler colonialists by exposing their historical roles in Indigenous disposition. Okay, so now let's take a look at some scholarly articles, peer-reviewed sources, to support our previous claims. First off, we have the article Abounded Land by Cole Harris, where we learn about the displacement of Indigenous peoples from their traditional territories in Canada. Policies like the Indian Act and unfair treaties confined Indigenous communities to smaller areas known as Indian reserves, while settlers took over valuable land. This systematic disposition illustrated the impact of settler colonialism on Indigenous lands and ways of life. Similarly, the article Land, Children, and Politics, Native Americans and Australian Aborigines, 1900s to 1930, explores the forcible removal of Indigenous children from their ancestral lands. This severed their ties to their territories and disrupted their cultural identity. We Live on Stolen Land further examines how settler colonialism disrupted Indigenous communities' relationship with the land and their cultural identity. These texts illustrate the profound consequence of land loss and displacement of Indigenous communities. In these pictures, you can see the loss of land over the years, till today. An example from the article Violence, Coercion, and Settler Colonialism underscores the military force by colonial powers to remove Indigenous peoples from their lands. This involved violent encounters such as massacres and forced relocations, aimed at asserting settler dominance over indigenous territories and resources. This connection between violence, coercion, and settler colonialism is evident in the history of indigenous land disposition. Finally, in the article They Have Stolen Our Lands, highlights the devastating impacts of colonialism on indigenous land tenure. Testimonials from the article emphasize the profound cultural impacts of land theft and displacement, including the loss of traditional practices, languages, and spiritual connections to the land. In conclusion, these texts shed light on the historical injustices faced by Indigenous peoples and the ongoing impact of settler colonialism on their lands and communities. It's important to recognize and acknowledge these realities as we work towards reconciliation and justice for Indigenous people. By understanding the historical context of colonialism and its ongoing impacts, we can work towards building a more just and equitable future for all. Thanks for watching!